Hello, on the eve of bonfire night. Welcome to the 11th act of subversive kindness. The leaves are slimy yellow light, the year's a sticky door, the wind bangs in the barest trees and shakes the apple core. No, again, the leaves are slime, the year's a bloodshot eye, the trees are the rooms of bedlamites with bars across the sky. And that's how Jacob Polly tells us about this time of year in Jack-o'-lantern, and that's in his hauntingly terrific collection, Jack Self. So here we are in November, the part of the year Ted Hughes so memorably called the month of the drowned dog. Now I tend to agree with him on that. So a while back, I reckoned it would be important to have some kind of diversionary tactic up my gansy sleeves for the darkening season. So let's bring on the fun and games. I love the playfulness of a well-structured parody. Wendy Cope, of course, is sort of preeminent in the field of parody, and I recommend her take here on Whiskavar. Whiskavar. Deft, practiced, eager, your fingers twist the metal cap, late into the moth-infested night. We listen to soft scrapings of bottle top on ridged glass, the plash and glug of amber liquid streaming into tumblers inches deep. Life water, fire-tanged, hard stuff, gallons of it. Sipped and swigged and swallowed. Whiskey, its terse vowels belie the slow fuddling and mellowing, our guttural speech slurring into warm, thick blather, the pie-eyed, slug-witted slump into soused oblivion, and the awakening, I long for pure cold water as the pump creaks in the yard, a bucket clatters to the ground, is agony. Now, this comes from her excellent collection, Making Cocoa for Kingsley Amos. And I read it in part to show that even my beloved Heaney Dozen is not above having the rip taken of him. I like to believe that the twinkle-eyed poet, who wrote perhaps his only bit of doggerel about a certain suggested poetic royal appointment, would have had the good spirit to enjoy Cope's fun. And there are so many other excellent things in her finely tuned parody, and in particular, I commend that you check out how she reinvented Christopher Smart's hymn of praise to his beloved cat in what she does in My Lover. It's brilliant. It's in that same collection. Incidentally, our humorous poems can be hard to place sometimes, I think. So you may wish to look up the site devoted to funny poems called Spilling Cocoa over Martin Amis. John Glenday's poetry never ceases to amaze me, and perhaps Green is my favourite of his collections. Unlike Cope, John is certainly not primarily a humorous poet, far from it. But here he is in St. Orage, being very funny indeed. And of course, it's a poem that really needs to be seen on the page as well as heard. So buy the collection. St. Orage. Preserve us, St. Orage, you whose image stares down on our weed-snagged railway sidings and choked factory yards, whose relics crumble in a cardboard box, in a hampered lock-up somewhere. We await your word. St. Edfast and St. Allward, we rely on you to indicate the good path, however stony. Lead us not into that rock-strewn gully clogged with St. Randed's bones. O Lord, We know you're faithful, knew more death than we had fingers. St. Eiffel and St. Wrangel and St. Arving and St. Ab all flew into your mercy through their disparate anguishes. But most of all, remember us, yourselves, forgotten saints. Here we here commemorate St. Agar of the drunken brawling praise, St. Aenlas, martyred on the lopped branch of his perfect life, St. Ansa, stunned by her own reverberating song, and blameless, immaculate, St. Igmata, dead and forgiving child, who even in the crib, they say, held up her little punctured hands in wonder and in ignorance and cried. So that's in green and highly recommended. John himself has a calming presence, and I can see readily why he was so well suited to being an NHS addictions counsellor. I would imagine the burdens carried in such a post would really need to be married to the ability to find lights in darkness. How often do our funniest poems and light, wider thoughts come to us in times of difficulties? Humour and great sadness so often sit so close together. I well remember the strangeness and power of family laughter the night before my first husband's funeral. The human spirit finds equilibrium in very interesting ways. Back to John Glenday. I first met John at a poetry surgery he was giving in Edinburgh. The darkness in that basement room was very real because there was a power cut. The great poet asked whose work I enjoyed. I was so overawed that the only name I could remember was Seamus Heaney. I'd have been hard pushed to remember my own telephone number at that point, so overwhelming was my terror. Every so often, mid-discussion, I blurted out just another random poet's name in the fading hope of redeeming myself. Ever since, I've been really scared to meet John Glenday, despite his wonderful poetry surgery, and despite his really calming presence, because I've no doubt he sees me as a complete blithering idiot. Well, it's not only Seamus Heaney. I find the Northern Irish poets in general really inspirational. Michael Longley, of course, Leontia Flynn, and the wonder that is Colette Bryce. And often there's a dark humour laced through some of their work, of course. Look at what Bryce achieved so movingly in the M Papers. If you haven't read it, just do. Perhaps in the face of what people there went through in the Troubles, that gallows humour was a powerful ally. One of my regular go-to poets is Sinead Morrissey. I dare not show you my copy of On Balance because it's frighteningly scruffy. I love it so much. Again, Morrissey is not intrinsically a poet of humour, though she is indeed playful with words. But here we have her looking at a plaything, a toy. And this comes from her earlier collection, Parallax, published in 2013, but somehow it has a lot of relevance in 2022. Jigsaw. The royal children have been sent a gift, a map of Europe from 1766, complete with longitude painted onto wood, like any other map in brown and green and red, but then disfigured, cut up into parts, a disassembly of tiny courts strewn across the table. There is a key to help the children slot, country by country, the known traversable world in place. Little Tartary, Swedish Lapland, France, the government of Archangel. The sea has been divided into squares, crudely, as though the cast iron sides of nations still applied, but with more attention to geometry, while the engraver's signature, a circle, his name, a folded flower, has been deftly sawn in half. If successful, the three young princes and the oldest girl, this is not, after all, a lesson in diplomacy, so she can play too, will, ironically, undo the puzzle's title and its claim, Europe divided in its kingdoms, shall be Europe reconfigured, whole. They start in the top left corner with the scale, then fill the other corners in part of Africa, a scroll, the blank of simply Asia. Rolling off to hordes and steps and snow beyond the boundary, outlines follow, aided by exquisite lettering. The frozen ocean solidifies across the map's ceiling. And so the royal children spend an hour staring and exclaiming, clicking together. What joy! The angled buttresses of a continent, their own unlikely island on a slant by its furthest edge, and in their trance ignore what will no longer fit. Eritrea, America. Sorry, I mispronounced that last line. However, and the poem opposite that is Puzzle, and that's from Sinead Morrissey's Parallax. And as we all know, as we do with the origin of Ring o' Roses, play is not always funny at all, but how much we depend on play. Famously, of course, Picasso observed that as a child he could draw like Raphael, but it took him a lifetime to learn how to draw as a child did. And yes, we know he was a bit naughty on the matter of updating unofficially some of his admittedly precocious childhood drawings to make the Raphael point that bit more strongly. But that childlike exploration is fundamental to the principles of any visual art education. Even in an art school setting, tutors will take a certain delight, I think, in helping students newly arrive from schools with their well-polished folios and smash up some of their expectations and return them to playing with the basics. And it's important that we do make that fall and that recollection in any creative journey. Perhaps how we return to our responses to, say, sounds, textures, which arrive well before we are hit with whatever meaning may be in a poem, is somewhere in the same territory. Being prepared to play can be pretty scary sometimes. But we need all the lifts we can take in this month of the drowned dog, and I'd like to suggest we enjoy the grace of this beautiful poem, which is about skipping and so much more. And it's by our fellow FWS member, Ruth Aylett, and it's taken from her excellent pamphlet, Queen of Infinite Space, which is on Maytree Press, and it's called Letting Go. Letting go, the moment when the skipping rope smacks down onto the ground and you jump in cleanly, just like that. The moment when the ball hurtles towards your connecting foot, blam, a perfect volley for an unstoppable goal. The moment when there is a sudden silence and on the beat you make a witty remark to a whole room laugh of approval. That moment when I understand no handhold will hold you long and those bronze wings lift you into the sky. Very beautiful. I highly commend Ruth's work to you. Next month, of course, sees the last of our acts of subversive kindnesses. But who knows, you may be subversive and decide to share some of your own alternative possibilities. And why not? That would be fun. In mid-January, I'll call for submissions to a special edition of Firth, which will have 12 pieces each made in response to these video prompts or these video explorations. I'm keen to see what's brewing out there. But first, I will see you in December with something a little different. but I thank you for staying around.